organizations working together, talking about race in an attempt to try and find solutions to the problems of race inequality in education. It's really, really good that there's this forum of openness. So that's really, really something to be pleased about. I see on the sheet, or the card, strength in difference, and I've tweeted this out because I think it's just so apt that we can recognize our own strengths. And just one caveat, when I use the word BAME, I mean global majority, and I also mean BAME. So if you hear me refer to BAME, it's consistent with the other expression. So just a little talk about some work I'm doing and how this might help us to understand the roles of organizations in conscious or unconscious bias. My work is primarily around teacher progression. And I want to talk a little bit about this notion of white sanction. So the context of this work is in relation to some body of work that I've done in corruption in education. And I know we wouldn't easily identify corruption with education. It just doesn't happen. But education is actually not squeaky clean. And I looked at some work on the politics of progression in Jamaica around primary school teachers, and replicated that work in the UK with some head teachers here. And as a result of that work on the progression of teachers in Jamaica and in the UK, I've also gone on to do some work on the progression of academics in the universities in the UK, which has also been picked up by UNESCO and have gathered some traction around that, because normally we think about corruption in education, the sale or the resale of goods and materials, procurement. We think about sex for grades and other kinds of stuff. We don't think about teacher progression, which is a problem that I'm trying to resolve through my research. So we know what the data says. The data says that BAME participation in education is problematic. We see that not only participation is problematic, we see that progression is problematic. There aren't enough BAME teachers going into the profession, because when you look at the grades that our BAME students are getting at universities, they are the ones who are getting the poor class degrees, and therefore they are the ones who don't have the qualification benchmark to get into university teacher training programs. And then those who do get into the programs are having a hell of a time progressing, and that becomes a double barrel sword. So career progression, as I argue, among BAME teachers, academics, is a matter for education policy, but it is also a matter of education practice. Education policy in the sense that there are policies around progression, there are policies around equalities, but if policies are not implemented, then there's no point. So my argument today is that the situation we have around BAME participation and BAME progression in education in the UK is a failure of education policy and a failure of education practice. I'm not blaming individuals, I'm saying the system has failed us. So what the numbers tell us, the numbers speak for themselves. In 2017 March, of the approximately 2,000 head teachers in public schools in the UK, there were 277 BAME head teachers. Now last year, this number was 104, last year this number. So it means that the research that Christine and I and others are doing in this area is actually gaining some momentum, and it also means that the system is changing in some ways. So the numbers are not anywhere that they need to be, but I think we still have to recognize that things are happening. In terms of the context, the research context for teacher progression in the UK, this is a summary of the kind of studies that have been done. With the first study on progression of teachers in the UK actually took place in the selection of teachers in the UK took place in 1984, and Morgan thought that head teachers' selection was arbitrary and amateur, so people without the right experience. I mean, Damien talked about some of that just now. And Peter Early and others talked about stereotyping around ethnicity and gender. And others talked about the subtle influence of the networks that excludes some group. Can I just point out that all of this research, except for my research at the bottom there, looks at why people do not progress, whereas I look at why people progress. So I think what I've done is spun the thing up on the head to see why BAME people progress. So I found in some earlier research, the ones I talked about on the marks of the 2013-2014 study, that there were some marks of progression or some marks of affiliation, so the conscious stuff. And one of those was your political affiliation, that was important in small island states like Jamaica, and your religious affiliation. Another one was social connections, and the other one was jockeying or interference. Now, when that study was replicated here in the UK, the element of political interference was not so strong. But what was definitely a factor was the issue of policies. So if the government had this notion of designer leaders and want to teach first, or they want a particular type of leader. So even though the alignment to the political party was not problematic, the policy of the government of the day was also problematic for some groups of individuals. And of course the others were there. So I'll spare you the details around the theory because there's some interesting thing I want you to get, but I just Peggy McIntosh's work here that says white privilege is an institutional arrangement that grants a set of unearned benefits to people simply because they are white, and also McClendon's work that says whiteness has an invisible power, which is really important. So what did I find in constructing this theory of white sanction? And I interviewed, by the way, some teachers in schools and some academics in universities. So I'll share with you some of the snippets from the research. This was a study of progression among BAME academics and BAME teachers. And it was interesting that they were having the same experiences. So the first finding here is being part of a white network increases the likelihood of career progression, or the opposite is true. Not being part of a white network increases the likelihood of career stagnation. And somebody argues here, for at least 5 interviews I've had, I felt that they were unsuccessful because I was not part of the inner circle. And we know what that inner circle means. When I first came to the UK from Jamaica, I realized very early on that on Friday evenings my colleagues would go down to the annex, and the annex was the pub. Now, being a good Christian young man and all of that, I wouldn't go to the pub at all in Jamaica because of the culture and so on, you know. But then I learned very quickly that in order to make sense of your reality in the UK, you have to go to the annex. So many Friday evenings I was the first at the annex. You know, so just to let you know that. So here's a bit of frustration. Sometimes I think it's pointless for black academics to even apply, because someone in the club will usually get the job. So there's a mistrust. And if you are outside of the club, you won't be given a look in, hence the need to have what I describe in this work as white sanction. Finding 2, white sanction. So in here I argue that meritocracy is dead. Meritocracy is this grand fallacy. So qualifications is no longer sufficient for career progression. And this is one of the most fantastic expressions, this quotation by this teacher, this academic here. It is no longer enough to be qualified. Meritocracy will get you only so far. You have to have connections with white colleagues. And those connections must be more than surface level. Surface level connections are invisible, but you need connections that are visible. Connections with white colleagues in influential positions who will write your job references, deliver an address at your book launch, submit the next research bid with you, co-author a paper with you, and co-present a paper at a conference or a seminar with you. Anything less is not going to get you anywhere. And I think that's really, really, really important. You know, and this takes me back to the very first study in Jamaica in 2012, when one teacher who was trying to get a headship had applied for 15 positions and hadn't gotten through. And I remember him saying, because of the political influence, and in Jamaica, the member of parliament is responsible for choosing the chairman of the school board, and the chairman of the school board obviously chooses the head teacher. So this person, this guy, in his exasperation, he says, you have to know the member of parliament's telephone number, right? And I think it's really, really, really important. So just saying you know the MP is one thing, but to be able to take your phone out and phone the MP is a different kettle of fish, which is exactly the point here. So just saying you know this white colleague or that white colleague is one thing, because anybody can do name dropping. But to be able to say you're friends with this one, and this one did all of these things for you, wrote your reference, did your book launch speech, and all of that kind of thing, that is what is going to get you some kind of breakthrough. I wouldn't say credibility, but breakthrough. So then white sanction can also be indirect. And some teachers suggested here, I've been in my school for 12 years and I've seen a number of white teachers progress, leaving me behind. I love my job, but after 12 years, you're not ready. If I'm not ready after 12 years in one school, working in several roles, then when will I be ready? I guess when they tell me. I have 13 years teaching experience in this country, and 5 years in Guyana. I've been promoted to HOD and now lead practitioner since arriving here, but it seems that's as far as I will be allowed to go. And then the teacher said, although my native language is English, believe it or not, and since I cannot change my skin color, I guess I should commit to speaking the Queen's English, as that will give me an edge. In other words, there's a subtle distinction there, that there's an English which is Caribbean, and there's an English which is to be found in England, which is more subtle and more nuanced. And therefore, if you are able to acclimatize, acculturize to this new way of being, then you are more likely, or you could be more likely, to progress. So, in this theory of white sanction, I argue that white sanction occurs where the skills and the capabilities of a BAME individual are first acknowledged, and second, endorsed or promoted by a white individual who positions themselves as a broker, somebody who is trying to mediate on behalf of this BAME individual. And you might ask me, I see the time, and you might ask me, so is it bad for white academics to position themselves in this way? And I think white academics who position themselves in this way should not feel guilty at all, because I find that they are actually, in their way, trying to challenge the system. I think what is problematic, white sanction itself is problematic. But white colleagues who try to challenge the system in the ways they can should be applauded. And I don't think white colleagues should feel guilty for using white privilege or the privilege of their whiteness to try and make things better for black colleagues or BAME colleagues. And I think it's really important to make that point. So again, white sanction can be direct or it can be indirect, and there are some examples there. Christine and I were talking at breakfast this morning about myself, you know, and for those of you who don't know me or know a little bit about me, I'll just tell you one fact. You know, I came from Jamaica. I was born here, and I am the UK's first black professor of education and leadership. How is that even possible? But I couldn't, thank you, but I couldn't do it without white sanction. So it doesn't matter the brain in my head and the experience and my publications. It is my colleagues who recognize my talent, but also recognize the systems and the failure of policy and the failure of our education institutions. And said, well, okay, let's try and do something about it. So I just thought I'd have to make that point. So not every act of acknowledgement itself is white sanction, and so on, and I leave that there. But I want you to consider this. This is the final slide, and I've sped up because I want you to consider this. In the paper, I argue that there are 4 types of educational institutions, or there are 4 types of institutions, and I want you to consider which type of institution you work in, or which type of institution you lead, or which type of institution you want to lead. There are an engaged institutions which have BAME staff at all levels, so it's not tokenistic, and we don't need to have white sanction. And there are experimenting institutions, few BAME staff in posts, but even fewer in leadership posts. Initiated institutions, there's a framework in place, so there's a policy. But they haven't begun to experiment yet, so it's just few people in place, usually at the lower levels. And then an uninitiated organization, so there's no framework in place, and there's no BAME staff in place. So, as I said to you earlier, my contention is not with individuals, it is with institutions, and the failure of policies in organizations, and the failure of government policy to be implemented at organizational level. And that is why we have the mess that we have in our educational institutions in terms of equality and diversity and so on. So I then argue that, and I want to emphasize again that, you know, white sanction is problematic. In an ideal world, we should not need white sanction. But I think it should be recognized that there are white colleagues who are trying to defy the system in their ways, and those things should also be recognized as part of the discourse on race inequality or race equality in the UK. Thank you.